Test.
Good afternoon, Democrats. My name is Dr. Darshana Patel. I'm a research scientist by training, a working mother of 3 daughters, and a current second-term trustee in the Poway Unified School District Board of Education. As the daughter of immigrants who came here in the late 1960s, I understand what it's like for families to struggle during difficult times. If it were not for the caring teachers in my high school when my mother passed away unexpectedly when I was just 14, I know I would not be where I am today. I'm running for California State Assembly District 76 because I want to ensure that our community members have the resources and opportunities to thrive. In this state assembly, I will focus on fully funding public education, work to protect our environment, keep our communities safe, increase the access and quality of healthcare, as well as address housing and workforce shortages. In this race, I am the community candidate. I've been endorsed by over 45 locally elected officials, and they've endorsed me because they've seen me work over the past 13 years in this community, right now on the front lines of the culture wars in public education. I've even been endorsed by San Marcos Founding Board club member Betty Ball. I'm happy to be here today to answer your questions. I've also been endorsed in Sacramento by the API Ledge Caucus and the California Democratic Women's Caucus, both bodies who are still struggling to have adequate representation in the state legislature. I am here to help them support them in their causes. I'm also supported by labor throughout the state, the California Nurses Association, the Carpenters, as well as the California Faculty Association. These are key labor partners in tackling some of the critical challenges, the generational challenges we have ahead of us. In this race, the Cal Labor Federation put out a survey that shows I am the most viable candidate, and coming out of the June 30th fundraising, I had the most cash on hand, which shows that I am responsible with your donation dollars. I would love to earn your support tonight. Thank you very much.
Reminder to the audience, please hold your applause until the end. Candidate Rocha, please give us your opening statement.
Good afternoon. Yikes, that's very loud. My name is Joseph Rocha. I am a Navy and Marine Corps veteran and an attorney. Today happens to be Admission Day. So 173 years ago, the state of California entered the Union. And since then, this state has been a state of opportunity. And the purpose of my candidacy is to ensure that it remains a state of opportunity for all Californians, not just for the wealthy and not just for corporations. My grandparents were Mexican immigrants. They worked in the fields and factories miles away from the capital. And my mother raised me until I was 7. She was an addict and lost me in a high-speed chase, leaving Sacramento and trying to get back to Woodland. And that effectively ended my time in Northern California until I went to law school and until I ran for office. But these sacrifices of my grandparents drive me, and the challenges of my parents guide me. I am running out of a sense of duty and responsibility to you and every voter in Assembly District 76. As many of you may know, I ran for state senate last cycle, straight out of the Marine Corps, because on January 6th, I was a Marine officer on the East Coast, and I saw that our country was in big trouble in a very different way. So I felt called to service after giving my entire life to service in a different way, and that's when I entered politics. Now, last cycle, I earned 150,000 votes and came within 3 points of unseating the top Republican in the legislature here. And within the boundaries of this assembly seat, I earned more votes than he did, even though he spent millions of dollars in negative ads, negative false ads. And let me tell you, if an incumbent is not afraid of you, they do not spend money against you. I'm very excited to tell you about the campaign that we built this cycle to defend this seat and make sure that San Marcos has a vote and a voice in Sacramento. Thank you.
Now for our first question, and this will go to candidate Rocha. What are your top priorities in your first legislative session?
So my top priorities include housing, addressing the housing crisis that is an issue here in San Marcos and across the state of California, homelessness, which obviously includes my veteran community that I care very deeply for, and fighting for workers' rights. I am definitively the labor candidate in this race. I've been endorsed by the San Diego and Imperial Valley Labor Council. And on Monday, we'll announce that we earned the endorsement of the San Diego Building Trades. That's 158 unions affiliated with those two, 430,000 families. Families that have put their trust in me, and families that will help us defend this city. On the homelessness issue, they're interconnected, right? So we need to make sure that there is housing. We need to make sure that there's healthcare. We need to make sure that workers are being taken care of, that there are fair wages. And we need to take action on climate. The state of California is increasingly hotter every single year, and summers have become increasingly deadly for our firefighters and for our seniors, particularly who are on fixed incomes and can't afford these spikes in energy costs and in AC costs. And frankly, a lot of homes don't have ACs in San Diego, right? Because we were never supposed to be this hot in the first place. I've endorsed by the lion's share of representatives in the legislature, all 20 but one, I believe, legislators that have endorsed. And why that matters is it's not a popularity contest. It's about one, a letter of recommendation saying that they know I have what it takes. And two, it costs $2.5 million to defend this seat last cycle. And they, Assembly Dems, are the ones that will decide where the millions go this cycle. Thank you.
Dr. Patel, you have 2 minutes. Question. Yes. Testing. Testing. What are your top priorities in your first legislative session?
So to touch on this, I did talk about this a little bit in my opening statement, but to give you some details around the inspiration and the transition from being a bench scientist and a researcher into the civic space. When I was pregnant with my first child, living up in the Bay Area, it was the firefighters that taught me, that nervous mom, how to install that first car seat. And then when I had my emergency C-section, and I had an extended stay in the hospital under very risky conditions, it was the nurses that helped me recover. And then when we were looking at our elementary school, where we were going to put our children for schooling, we found out that the teachers in the elementary school also were struggling. So after talking to community members in the Bay Area, realized very quickly that it wasn't just those of us who were young professionals that couldn't afford a home or couldn't afford childcare. It was all the caretakers in the community. And so that's when I decided that I would put my own career on hold and enter into the civic space. So in public education, where I'm at now, this is the perspective that I bring with me. What I see is a microcosm of what's happening throughout our communities in all different sectors. Our teachers, our educators, our classified employees are struggling to find housing in the communities that they serve. So when we look at our educators not being able to do that, we know all the other service providers in the community are struggling in the same way. And the same thing goes for accessing healthcare. Same thing goes for protecting our environment. We have very similar priorities, sure, but the experience and the qualifications and having done this work for the past 13 years positions me uniquely to get some of these problems solved. I appreciate that we have all of these challenges ahead of us, but realize that these are generational challenges. They didn't start happening overnight and they will take a while to unwind. I have that grit and determination to stick to it and make sure we solve these generational challenges, whether it's housing, healthcare, environment, or any of the other number of challenges we have ahead of us. Thank you.
And then Rocha, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
And I'm very happy that grit and determination has come up today. So the reason why I'm a Navy and Marine Corps veteran is because after being a bomb dog handler in the Middle East as an 18, 19, and 20-year-old, and after being abused physically, mentally, and sexually by my commanders, I was discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Honorably, I came out, I broke, I needed it to end. I then dedicated my life to the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was in the case that ruled it unconstitutional and ended the law. I'm a lawyer, and I'm running to be a lawmaker. It is very important that we have legislators who know what they're doing, especially with term limits, where they're in such a hurry to get their name on a bill that they don't care about the second and third order consequences of it, because guess what? They won't be around by the time it affects your community. So my skill trade is what I'm running for. I was a prosecutor in the Marine Corps. I will bring that same dedication to service and that same qualification of law to this position. Thank you.
Our next question is about jobs and the economy. And this will go to candidate Patel. During COVID, the state reduced property tax increases, but that has impacted cities like San Marcos, which had budgeted for those revenue increases. How do you propose to help local governments address the resulting revenue shortfalls?
That's a very weighty question, and I appreciate it because one of your committee members had thought really deeply and long about posing this question to us. There's a lot of different ways that the state government can intercede and help cities in balancing their budgets, and there are lots of different ways that we can come together. Having endorsements from local city elected officials as well as people in the wider community, I can work together with them to come up with the best plan. I don't think it's one person's solution that's going to come up with a plan to help these revenue shortfalls. Some of the challenges are around unemployment. We know when there's inflation, a lot of that has to do with more complete employment ratios. That's how the economics of jobs, inflation work and tie together. So when we have periods of high employment, that also leads to high inflation. And so ways that we can work together with our local cities through the government is looking at bringing down costs of goods, maybe through grants and support programs. We can help shore up infrastructure challenges that the cities may be dealing with through state and federal grants that are available to our local governments. Make sure that that information is being shepherded along. As a school board trustee, it came very recently to me in a meeting with Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs that there were these grants available for infrastructure, right? We all heard about the infrastructure program that the federal government passed. Well, there was a grant deadline that came and many of our local municipalities didn't even know about that. So being at the table, knowing when these grants are available is very important, making sure that information gets disseminated so that our local governments can access those grants. And then finding ways for us in the state legislature to partner with our elected officials and make sure they know when those deadlines are, when they can receive the money. So there are many different things we could do. And I'm looking forward to having a seat at the table. Being someone who has been at the ground in ground level government, I understand the challenges of accessing all of these grant programs, and we need to streamline that process. Thank you.
Candidate Rocha, during COVID, the state reduced property taxes. During COVID, the state reduced property tax increases, but that has impacted cities like San Marcos, which had budgeted for those revenue increases. How do you propose to help local governments address the resulting revenue shortfalls?
I think like any major issue facing the state of California, it's going to be multifaceted. I think first and foremost in our community and in this district, what we need to do is fight to elect more Democrats. These two cities, Escondido and San Marcos, which have a majority of Democrats registered, do not have Democrats running the cities. That's very important, and it's very harmful. As we see that year after year, these budgets aren't balanced and they're not fiscally taking care of these cities. The second one from the state, I will be, as a former consumer protections attorney, I will be, no friend of bad actors. I'll make sure that corporations are paying their fair share. Corporations and large scale employers want workers to carry or spread the pain when we're in difficult times, but they don't want to share in the profits. And we need people in Sacramento who understand that and who are not afraid to stand up to those corporations. Again, they spent millions of dollars in negative and false ads against me. And that's your insurance policy because it didn't change anything I was saying. I ran on the same positions and the same platform this cycle because those were big issues that mattered. And guess what? In November, overnight, they weren't solved. Right? So that's why I want to go up to Sacramento and help with that. Now, infrastructure matters a lot to this community, right? The two bridges that we're building right now on Via de la Cruz and on Bend, the expansion of Discovery, these are things that affect your quality of life. And you need to have someone in Sacramento who has the relationships to bring home the funding to do that. And as you can see, with the amount of support I have in both chambers, I can do that, and I look forward to doing it for you. 5 seconds, I'll give it up. Okay.
Candidate Patel, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you for that. So when we look at the infrastructure needs in San Marcos specifically and across the 78 corridor, most of you live along that 78 corridor and access these transit ways. What we know is that this transit system is not working. It hasn't been working for a long time. And having attended the SANDAG regional workshop meeting the other night, I know that every 4 years, SANDAG works on building a new plan. And then as soon as the new plan comes out, they have to start working on the next new plan because it takes 4 years to build that plan. And what I've seen through these regional workshop meetings is that we're not seeing the community input that we really should be seeing. And we need to build that community input, make sure the people who need to access those services are being represented in those rooms. And then have that information come up and work with these state assembly members and the state senate and make sure those infrastructure dollars are coming right back down to the communities where they belong. For example, expanding the Sprinter line to have 2 different direction of tracks, that's going to be monumental for you, but it's coming a little bit slow. Thank you.
Our next question is on education, and it goes to candidate Rocha. What role does the assembly play in determining public school curricula? And how would you ensure California's children's education remains high quality and secular?
Let's see. So first, the legislature has a responsibility to protect its citizens. Right now, we're hearing a lot about protecting parents' rights, when in reality, what they're doing is they are attacking the most vulnerable children in our schools. The Republicans are. We are not immune of that in the state of California, which should alarm all of us. And we've seen great leadership in the Attorney General and in the legislature to ensure that these children are not outed and put into undue harm. As far as the quality of our education, I mean, I think that's a little generous, right? We rank too low in education as a state of California. We spend too little per pupil in the state of California, and we are not taking care of our teachers. That's why, despite running with a school board member, we were the ones endorsed by CSEA, classified school employees, and we share the CFA, the faculty endorsement, rather than losing it. So what we need is leadership at the state level. What's the rest of the question, Jim?
What role does the assembly play in determining public school curricula? And how would you ensure California children's education remains high quality and secular?
So I think we've hit on most of that, but I think that communities should be building their curricula in cohort with their school boards. And I think that the state should really only be stepping in situations where there is abuse or there is discrimination or it leaves our values. And I think that that's currently what we see in our legislature, and I'd like to support that. And as a 17-year service member, I will ensure that we are serving our citizens and our state and our country, not any church. Thank you.
Candidate Patel, what role does the assembly play in determining public school curricula? And how would you ensure California children's education remains high quality and secular?
Thank you for that question. Public education is where my heart lies. I know for me, it was the gateway to success and opportunity. And I know for this nation, it is the bedrock of ensuring a secure democracy. And I don't say those words very lightly. I really believe in representative democracy. So when we look at public education in California, it's not a simple thing. We have a very different way of funding public education in California. It's through something called the Local Control Accountability Plan. It does allow local control at the school board level. We also have Prop 98 that determines funding for public education. It's about 40% of our state budget. However, Prop 98 has been targeted or directed as the floor and not the ceiling. It never needed to be the ceiling, but the state legislature always treats it as the floor. So you take that side of the house with how funding is done, and then you look at how curriculum is adopted. Curriculum in the state of California is put through a politically appointed state board of education. And those board members are chosen based on their areas of expertise. The state legislature doesn't necessarily determine what curriculum comes through. It comes through the State Board of Education. Additionally, our state superintendent has now been, his position, a lot of that state superintendent's position, the authority has been removed from that person. And it's been shifted to the Board of Education. So there's some power structure imbalances going on here, or rebalancing that needs to be done. But what the state legislature can do is it can ensure smooth governance of the school boards at the ground level. It can make sure that our students have the protections they need, that our staff has the protections that they need. And some of the challenges around what my opponent said here about me with CSA, the reason why I wasn't able to secure that endorsement was because sometimes what we see is school boards struggle with their funding and they have to make choices. And those choices can sometimes be very difficult. But in going on with that, as your public education champion, I'm here to defend public education. Thank you.
Candidate Rocha, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
Thank you. I happen to be first generation in my family to go to community college, at City College at University of San Diego, law school, and to be an officer in the Marine Corps. This issue is very personal to me and something I care very much about. And again, I make no excuses of being for labor and for workers and making sure that workers are taken care of first and they're not the last on a budget item when budgets are being balanced. I am committed to ensuring that the quality of our education is increased, and I think that starts with the way that we support our teachers. And our funding needs to be not year by year, but rather something that is always included in the California budget so that teachers and school districts don't have to hold their breath every year not knowing what resources they'll have.
Our next question is on healthcare, and it'll go to candidate Patel. What is your plan to ensure universal access to quality, equitable, and affordable healthcare for Californians?
This is a very deeply personal issue to me. My mother passed away when I was 14 years old because we didn't have access to healthcare. This was at a period when my father was out of work. He was a civil engineer. He came to America with very little except his knowledge and experience of civil engineering. He didn't speak English very well and was passed up often for promotion and job choices. And so we were in and out of work a lot as a family. We didn't have health insurance and I lost my mom. Healthcare is a human right. Unfortunately, my dad, he was on Medicare. We thought we were doing all the right things, but we were waiting for that prior authorization to come through. And during that time period, my father succumbed to the illness that we were waiting for that authorization. So when I talk about expanding the access and quality of healthcare, ensuring that there is a process for universal healthcare, this is definitely a top priority of mine. Your ability to access healthcare should not be dependent on where you're employed or whether you are employed. I've learned very recently that the Palomar Hospital that serves the communities of Poway, Ramona, Rancho Penasquitos, Rancho Bernardo, they recently shut down their maternity wards. This is a highly residential community that needs that maternity ward, and yet it got shut down. And that was due to budgetary constraints. And I can understand being a board member that sometimes there are budgetary constraints, but that was heartbreaking. So we need to do several things. We need to increase workforce training, making sure that our nurses and our medical providers of all kinds, mental health as well as physical health, get the services and support they need to get through colleges and universities and come and serve our public. We need to make sure that they have access to housing in the communities that they serve. So part of this will be a collaborative effort with our unions, with our labor partners. It'll be a collaborative effort with our hospital associations and with our hospital boards to make sure we're providing that continuum of care from cradle to grave. And I'm gonna fight for that because it's very, very deeply personal to me as it is to all of you. Thank you.
Candidate Rocha, what is your plan to ensure universal access to quality, equitable, and affordable health care for Californians?
So right now, the Senate has a bill that will explore exactly how we could reach full health coverage in the state of California, how we would fund it, and whether or not people are able to keep their provider. These are all questions that are valid, that concern our voters, and that have been weaponized against us by the Republican Party every time we try to do something better with healthcare. So I think that's an excellent first step. I think when we have the answers to those questions, and we should fight until we do, we can then put forward universal healthcare in the state of California. I mean, I am deeply committed to the idea that healthcare is a human right. So is the party, and so is the state. And I look forward to continuing to be aggressive and find ways to do that. Something we don't hear enough about, but we have seen some progress on, is access to mental health care. Through my abuse that we lightly touched on, I do have PTSD, and I've never been afraid of bringing that to the campaign. I hope that it shows that with the right resources and supports, that our veterans are not broken, actually. We just need healing. With that healthcare access, it includes, we need to make sure that when I say access, it doesn't mean that you can get it, but rather that we're increasing the spaces where you can find it. And more often than not, the best place for that is schools. When I was growing up with a mother who's an addict, the schools were more than just education to me. They were more often than not a hot meal, a nurse, a counselor, and I want to make sure that students still have access to that. I have very specific plans for our veteran community. I want to make sure that we are covering eyes and dental. Currently, right now, you have to be 100% disabled to access those services. And I want to make sure that the state fills that gap that the federal government has created.
Rocha, Candidate Patel, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
I would just like to add a couple points. Coming through the lens of a school board trustee, we do think about healthcare. You know, in our school district, Poway Unified School District, we're a very large school district, 35,000 kids, middle class mostly. People are shocked to learn we have hundreds of kids that are homeless in our school district. And like our community in Poway Unified, there are thousands across the county. So yes, universal healthcare applies to children as well. And I think one of the ways we could do that, one way that I've been doing that as a school board trustee and as a delegate to the California School Boards Association, is supporting the expansion of the community schools model. I think when we look at community schools, not just as an opportunity for after school care and maybe some tutoring, but we look at it as an opportunity for children to access those hearing and vision screenings, because we know that's critical for them to access their learning. We also see access to social workers to help with parents and managing mental health concerns at home and just navigating the system that's very, very difficult for these families. Thank you.
Our next question is on immigration. It goes to Candidate Rocha. What can the California Assembly do to help documented and undocumented immigrants achieve the American dream?
Well, first it starts with ending the criminalization of people who are in the state. And any restrictions that we keep on this idea of immigrant or non-immigrant, citizen or non-citizen, is only driving people into the darkness and putting them at harm, and making all of our communities less safe. Immigrants from the beginning of time and from the beginning of my time in the state have been main and massive contributors to the state of California, and we need to honor them. You know, we've seen attacks on DACA. When I was in law school, we would go to the Central Valley to provide legal services to immigrant communities and to the farming communities. Which right now a presidential candidate for the Republican Party has just recently in the last 24 hours said that he would deport all children who were born here, which is unconstitutional, support all children of parents who are not documented. So, it starts with language, the idea of alien or immigrants. And then it moves towards making sure that we are embracing everyone in our community. I think for the farm working community in particular, something that we have to address is wage theft. The issue with labeling people is that it allows employers to be able to abuse them. Because we have laws in the book that say you have to earn a certain amount of money. We have laws in the book that say that you have to have certain safety conditions in your workplace. But when you're undocumented, guess what? You can't say anything, and your employer knows that and often abuses it. Something that we have to do in California that we should be ashamed of is also make sure that farm workers can organize. Thank you.
Candidate Patel, you have 1 minute rebuttal.
I would like to use this time to paint a little more color into the picture of what it is to be an undocumented immigrant. I think one part of the story that we don't hear a lot about is in the dreamer space of API community members. So we don't hear a lot about this. We have a certain vision in our head of what an undocumented person looks like, and it's really not a full picture of that. Because of the H-1B visa backlog, what we're seeing is many children who were brought to the US from their parents who came here on a worker visa are now aging out of the system and are having to self-report. So when we talk about dreamers, I would love to see this conversation and allyship come into the API community. What we've seen is the Latino community is taking this fight on their own a lot of the times. And we need to bring solidarity with the Asian community in there, raise awareness that these fights for dreamers, for DACA, it involves a broader coalition of people, and we need to bring them all together. So immigration is really a federal level issue. So we have to find ways that we can collaborate with our federal government to make sure that our community members, those members that are providing to our vibrant economy, the diversity of our economy, that are doing the essential work that other people aren't willing to do, that they are provided and allowed to have status. That's very important. Status brings dignity. And we need to have that dignity provided to all of our community members so that they can achieve that American dream. We all fight and struggle for that American dream. So what I would like to see California do is work more closely with our federal government to make sure that our workers here in California have access to all the rights and services that they're owed because they are contributing to this economy. We need to do that, and that needs to be a priority. We need to find ways to document them and bring them in because they are accessing services, they're accessing public education and healthcare. And so we need to make sure that they can do that with dignity. And I would be happy to work with our federal government to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Moderator here, that was Candidate Patel's 2 minute response as allotted. Candidate Rocha, you have a 1 minute rebuttal.
I think first and foremost in this very challenging and difficult area that we have to meet head on is we have to realize that we have a lot of trust to earn, right? We have handled this issue very poorly. And frankly, every election cycle, we have to hear why is the Latino community not coming out? And it just drives me crazy because what have we done to give the Latino community, 1, a reason to come out, 2, a reason to care, and 3, any sense of safety or security that if they participated as citizens in this state or in this country, that they would be taken care of and protected. So I fully support making sure, I fully support public safety, and these things are not at odds. We should be using our law enforcement resources to keep our communities safe, not to help ICE deport our neighbors.
Now we'll move on to criminal justice system reform and public safety. Candidate Patel, for your 2 minute response, what alternatives would you sponsor to reduce mass incarceration of the poor, mentally ill, and homeless?
What we know is in the state of California, we are increasing our budget year over year, except in the very recent past. for the criminal justice system instead of the public health system and instead of public education. And I think if we use our values, what we know is our budgets speak to our values. And if we value all of these reforms, we need to put our money in those spaces. So that means investing in public health, that means investing in mental health services, that means investing in diversion programs, investing in public education to make sure that we can keep people out of the criminal justice system. But ultimately, sometimes that happens. So then what are we gonna do? Well, right now, there's a legislation before the state assembly to add 2 members to the parole review board. This would be a mental health provider and a physical health provider to come and provide input on that potential parolee status. And yet when this bill came up previously, our governor vetoed it. And he spoke out against it, saying it would add to the complexity of the process, increase the timeline, maybe even impact the budget. I just don't understand that position. And I think if we had that in there, we would do much better in making sure that our recovered people, individuals, when they're returning to the public, that they're given the access to care and services that they need to transition out. We want to reduce recidivism. We want to reduce the pipeline from going from being incarcerated to being homeless. So having those services and supports funded continually year over year and not through this grant process that people have to apply for continually, but having it funded in the budget to make sure that those providers of those services can be whole and be stable and continually provide that transition to help reduce recidivism into our criminal justice system. In public education, we believe in restorative justice. This is what we do. And I think we need to continue to do that for our adults in our community as well. Thank you.
Candidate Rocha, what alternatives would you do to sponsor to reduce mass incarceration of the poor, mentally ill, and homeless?
This is another one of those issues where we like to have a simple solution, and the fact is that we're going to have to dig our heels and do a lot of work and focus from a lot of different areas. So the first thing is we need to, as an attorney and a courtroom attorney, we need to ensure that we are revisiting our sentences. Do our sentences make sense? Our sentences are built on a theory, a very old theory of punishment. They're not built on a theory of rehabilitation, much less on reintegration of people who have made mistakes. People like my mom, people like my brother. So it starts with looking at that. Something that we have gotten terribly wrong, and we need legislators. Again, this is the value of having lawyers in the legislature. People think there's a lot more lawyers in the legislature than there are, actually. There are quite few at this point. And what we got terribly wrong is the 3 strikes law. We need to revisit that. I would prefer that we not have it. Again, it's a law that is built on a theory of punishment. But we need to make sure that that third crime that is committed is not something so simple that does not fit the design or the intention of the law in the first place. Probation is something I care a lot about. The first time I heard that my brother had gone back to prison, I figured it was for something terrible, an assault or who knows what, and I learned that it was because he was cutting hair without a barber's license. Well, we're from Woodland. So in Woodland, there's no barber licensing places. Part of his parole was also that he couldn't drive, so he couldn't get to Sacramento. This is before the internet was really handy and useful, so he couldn't get it online either. So we need to revisit what exactly we are doing with the power that we have given ourselves through the social compact.
That's been Candidate Patel. You have 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you for that. When we look back at the question about mass incarceration of homeless and drug addicted individuals, or perhaps even individuals experiencing mental health issues, what we need to look at is fully supporting our mobile crisis response teams and those community-based organizations that develop these mobile crisis response teams, as well as clinicians that join with our law enforcement individuals when they're going out on their rounds. And I would even love to see an expansion of clinicians join our firefighters. And that's something that I proposed to the firefighters when I met with them. I think these are some ways we can help reduce the incarceration of individuals that are actually suffering complex issues in their lives rather than just imprisoning them. Let's try to treat those conditions and get them matched to the right services and supports they need. And then when people do come out of prison, let's give them workforce training so those cycles don't keep perpetuating. There are programs with our labor partners that help do that, and I would love to see support and expansion of that. Thank you.
Our next question is on housing for candidate Rocha. 2-minute response. The state and San Diego have struggled with homelessness while spending more each year. What would you work on to better address the homeless situation?
I love this. We started with housing, so I was going to say I love this issue, but then it ended in homelessness, so I didn't want to say that. I have been endorsed by 3 of the greatest pioneers on the housing, attacking and dealing with the housing crisis in our legislature. Senator Scott Wiener, Assembly members Rick Chavez, and Matt Haney. I think we have to be creative, and we've seen excellent examples of what we can do. So Senator Wiener pushed for the last year and is now successful in ensuring that we're dealing with these archaic zoning laws that aren't doing us any good in meeting our housing needs. So his last bill allowed churches and schools, I think churches first, to be able to build housing on their property, which is fantastic, especially because more often than not, a lot of those churches are providing the wraparound services that we need to ensure that people stay out of homelessness. I think something that's very creative, and I won't take credit for, my community endorsement, the top Democratic vote-getter of San Marcos has written extensively on this, is the use of abandoned commercial corridors or industrial corridors, right? I hate to break it to you, but Sears isn't coming back, right? So what are we doing with that space? And if we build them in ways that make sense, we can create walkable communities where we start to decrease the traffic around here rather than increase the traffic, because traffic is a housing issue, it's a climate issue, because people are having to commute further and further to be able to live or work in our community. So many housing options. Senator Tony Atkins, I also want to take credit for this, has proposed a pilot program that is a revolving equity for first-time home buyers. So we're going to see the results of that pretty soon because it started last year and it's very exciting. So you want to
Candidate Patel. The state and San Diego have struggled with homelessness while spending more each year. What would you work on to better address the homeless situation?
So part of my history of how I ended up arriving at this place of running for state assembly is I spent 5 years on our local community planning board. And I used that time to learn about zoning laws and learn about how the development process works at the grassroots level. I learned about CEQA, for example, and how zoning can be changed and what that process looks like at a local ministerial level. So all of that knowledge and experience I have, I can take with me to Sacramento. So we learned that there are lots of delays in the system at the ministerial level. There are lots of opportunities where we can actually tighten up the system and tighten up efficiency. For example, some of our CEQA litigation that happens, they're weaponizing CEQA. They're using it against its actual intent of protecting the environment. And they're using it as a delay tactic. And we saw that happen in our community in a golf course redevelopment project. So what I would love to see is the creation of a board similar to PERB, which is the Public Employment Review Board, similar board for CEQA, where we could have an administrative law judge who has the expertise in CEQA, not a judge that may not have that expertise, but have that judge then review those cases. It takes pressure off of the legal system and it actually puts it in the hands of experts. As a research scientist, what I bring with me is this thirst for problem solving. I love taking these really, really tangled knots and unraveling them. And also as a scientist, I never see one law or one solution being permanent. If it doesn't work, let's fix it. If what we're doing, what we have been doing hasn't been working, our current legislature is trying so many different things, but we're not seeing the impacts on the ground level. So what I would like to see is us taking hold of this, actually looking at the data. We have billions of dollars going towards the housing crisis, and we're not seeing relief in it. So let's find out where the bottlenecks are and address those. Let's use our data to empower our decision making. And that's what I bring. Thank you.
Candidate Rocha, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
So we are running now in a district that is a Democrat plus 8, so there's an 8-point advantage to a Democrat. I just finished running in a district that had absolutely no advantage to either party, but then that's ironic because it was the top Republican in the state legislature, which has all the resources under the sun. So even then, I still won in this area, earned 150,000 votes as a no-name challenger. And how did we do that? We did that because we ran on the Marine Corps ethos. We convinced and connected with voters, our message connected with voters, that we would get things done, that we would cut red tape. And that's what we need to do, is we need action now. So we need to fix our zoning laws so that we can continue to, there's so much to say on housing. I'll try to work it in somewhere else. But we also need a good focus to prevent homelessness is stopgaps, right? Most people are only one paycheck or maybe one rent from going homeless, and we can help them that way.
Our next question is on transit. Start with candidate Patel. Should future gas tax revenues continue to be more focused on expanding highway capacity or building out more expansive public transportation?
Another very interesting question. Is that, okay, another very interesting question. I love these types of questions. These are things that I think about on the daily. So when we look at the gas tax and we look at how this is going to impact transit, we also have in parallel this goal of going away from fossil fuel utilizing cars. So that's going away from the gas tax. So when we talk about putting gas tax money towards infrastructure projects, well, that gas tax money is only going to go down. That we're losing sight of that revenue. So first of all, let's rethink how we're assessing our public on their transportation use. We have to come up with a different model, because this is not going to be sustainable as we transition to ethanol fuel vehicles or other types of fuel vehicles, whether it's electric car, CNG, whatever it might be, right? We're not going to get those revenues of those tax dollars. So we have to come up with a different strategy. When we look at those infrastructure dollars, we should be looking at state and federal funding. What we see is the gas tax is a recessive tax. And when I say recessive, what that means is those people who earn the lowest amount of income, who have to live furthest away from their employment centers, they are paying the highest amount of those gas taxes. They're making the greatest contributions. And so we need to find a different model instead of using this recessive taxing system to fund our infrastructure projects. And I would like to see us explore different ways that we can build up revenue for our transit needs. We need to prioritize transit, and that those dollars need to come from more stable sources of revenue that come from the state. We need to budget for that so it doesn't bump into the cycles of boom and bust or cycles of pandemics like with COVID, where nobody was driving and we weren't collecting barely any gas tax during those times. So what I propose is actually looking for a new model and exploring a new model. And that is a huge undertaking. But as a PhD, that's what I do. I do huge undertakings. I would be happy to tackle that one.
Candidate Rocha, should future gas tax revenues continue to be more focused on expanding highway capacity or building out more expansive public transportation? You have 2 minutes.
So that's a pretty easy answer. Is we need to build out our public transportation. Traffic is not going to go anywhere. Study after study has shown that expanding our highways does absolutely nothing to decrease the amount of traffic out there, but it costs you millions and billions and billions of dollars. If you create more room, you just invite more cars. That's all you're doing, which is increasing our effect on our climate, which is increasing the bad quality of the air in our communities. And so from back to the housing question, building more dense communities, not in your backyard, but in areas that make sense, like we talked about, and making them walkable, making sure that people have less need for cars. Also making sure, like legislation that has just been passed to ensure that we're building housing on transit areas, right? So cutting that red tape and getting through that zoning when we have areas that we can develop housing that is literally right off the track of useful transportation. And so again, taking away that need for the car. The gas tax is something that we need to fight basically. There are workers whose entire day is lost on paying for gas, right? Like the cost of gas, especially now. And it drives me absolutely nuts that when I was running last cycle, Senator Jones was kicking and screaming about gas prices, which were significantly lower than they are now, mind you. And now that they're over $5, you don't hear a single Republican in the county saying a darn thing about the price of gas. And as somebody who has taken on the oil company and had a ton of money spent against them, not afraid to do that, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Candidate Patel, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
I'd like to use my rebuttal time to add in a little more color. Again, I like to paint, I like painting metaphors because I can't actually paint, so the metaphors are great. So when we look at transit as our next best option to provide access to the workplace and to families that can't afford to drive a car, maybe they're not able to drive a car for one reason or another. I would like to ensure that the housing that we build, as we look towards housing and transit adjacency, that we're making sure that air quality and water quality also stays appropriate at those places. That means expanding regulatory oversight and increasing the government employees that come and measure and test all of those things. So one thing that I think about is the intersectionality of all these decisions that we make when we're thinking about transit and investing in transit. Are we also thinking about access to healthcare for those residents? Are they getting clean air, clean water, and are they able to test for that through access to healthcare? And are we able to do all of these things in a systemic, steadily, routinely funded manner? Thank you.
Our next question is on social and equity justice, and we'll start with candidate Rocha. The population of San Marcos is 40% Latino, Latina, and even greater in Escondido at 52%. These communities are the most underserved in Assembly District 76. How would you best address their needs?
I think it starts once again with building trust. And I'm very proud to be in the position that I'm in, where we have built such a broad coalition and with the strength to defend the seat so that this area can have its first, the Latino community in this area can have their first representative in the state legislature. That's something that drives me very much, that I care very deeply about, and is very humbling. And the only way we move forward with that is understanding that we don't have all the answers and actually engaging with our community leaders and hearing from them, the people who put the work in on the ground to tell us what and how we can do to better serve our community. Because everything ties back to housing, something that I feel we don't hear enough. And I understand that there is a crisis where we need low-income housing, but what we're not talking about, and really scares me, is we're not talking about middle-income housing. When we're talking about mixed use, we need to be talking about middle-income housing because we really are one paycheck, one health scare, one bad thing in your life from going from upper middle class to the street. A lot of people like myself, for many years, don't have family to fall back on. You miss that first rent payment and then you're evicted. And then you're not going to have 3 times the rent to get into a new apartment, much less the security deposits or the credit score. And so what do? Now you have all your stuff and nowhere to go. So that is incredibly important. We need to stay with our partners, be humble in our approach, and learn from them what best serves their needs and their community. Thank you.
Candidate Patel, the population of San Marcos is 40% Latino, Latina, and even a greater percentage at Escondido, 52%. These communities are the most underserved in Assembly District 76. How would you best address their needs?
As a state assemblywoman, what I would do is work closely with our community-based organizations, our public health systems, the county. I would work with those institutions that are gathering that on-the-ground data to see where those needs are, to see what those needs are, and to see how best we can deliver those needs. Because there is a lot of mistrust within communities, whether it's because of ICE or whether it's because of documented or undocumented status, or maybe some other experience that member of the community is going through, we need to lean on and rely on our community-based organizations and their partnership with the county and with other service providers to find out where and how to best deliver those needs. As a school board trustee, I am part of the North County leadership team that meets once monthly on Wednesdays in one safe place in San Marcos. And we are presented with data on a monthly basis and an opportunity to network with community-based organizations that are providing services. And what I've come to learn in those meetings is that oftentimes our community-based organizations aren't even being well informed about the services that or the grant monies or what they could be doing or how they can collaborate. What we see in that room is I'm the only elected official that shows up for those community leadership team meetings. And even none of the other electeds even send a representative. That is heartbreaking to me. That here is a room full of community leaders and they're telling the room what they need. And there are no elected officials there to hear that cry. But I'm there because I care and I want to find solutions and find ways to make things better, build those partnerships, build those alliances, so that when I do go to Sacramento, I'm able to hear their voices continually guiding me through my decision process, making sure that they have the services they need, making sure they have the continual ongoing resources that they need, so they don't have breaks in services that they're taking care of our community members, the most vulnerable among them. Thank you.
Then Rocha, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
I am deeply proud of having spent the last 17 years in the service, service to my country. I have not been at every meeting or tried to check every box on the way to the seat. In fact, I never planned on running for this seat. It's not been my objective. And the reason why I'm running is, again, out of a sense of duty and responsibility. This seat is vulnerable to somebody who is antithetical to all of our values, who was so toxic the Republican Party wouldn't even touch last cycle. We are the only candidate who has beat a Republican in this map. And look, I say I don't wish back-to-back races on my worst enemy. It has been emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, and professionally extremely difficult on me. But you took a chance on me last time, and I hope that you'll stick with me this time.
Our next question is climate change and environmental justice, and it'll go to candidate Patel. How would you balance water access? How would you balance water access with water rights to protect tribal communities and water supplies and guard against climate-induced extreme events in California?
This is another one of those very interesting intersectional questions because tribal lands are autonomous. They have a right to their lands and their water rights. And what we see happening time and time again is that insidious creep that comes into their authority. So we need to make sure that those lands and those water rights are protected. They've already been given short shrift. We can't continue to make them pay the price for our expansion. So when we look at these problems of water rights, we have to come back to ourselves and say, what could we be doing better as citizens? Are there ways that we can save water? Are there ways that we can be more water conscious? When we look at solutions to our other problems, like when we look at electrification and moving away from fossil fuels, we're looking at lithium. Well, where does lithium come from? It comes from the deserts. Whose lands are those? Whose lands are they adjacent to? Where does the water come from when we go to mine that lithium? Where is that water coming from? Ask yourself these questions, because these are the questions I ask on the daily to myself. How do we do this better? How can we ensure that we're not reducing that water table to dangerous levels so that when we're mining that lithium, we're not causing harm to other people that share that water table? So we need to put policies in place that take into account our histories, the understanding of our sciences, the understanding that what we're doing has a greater impact. Everything is intersectional. Everything that we do is intersectional. If we're going to get more water from another Pier 1 facility by desalination, what is that doing to our environment off the coast? When we're looking at water rights and finding ways to diversify our water sources, we have to look at the harms that we might be creating as well. And these are things that I churn in my head on the daily. When we look at Lake Hodges and they rebuilt it, they patched that dam so that we could get beyond 20%. And then they changed their minds and said, no, we're going to tear down that dam and put in rolled concrete. And we won't use that catch basin until then. We need to be more methodical about our processes.
Candidate Rocha, how would you balance water access with water rights to protect tribal communities and water supplies and guard against climate-induced extreme events in California?
So a lot of our, one of the most humbling and interesting things I got to do in the last race when I ran for the legislature is build relationships with our tribal leaders here in the area. In fact, Verona chose to endorse us even against the minority leader of the Senate, which caused a huge kerfuffle. And that was, I was deeply honored by that. Those relationships led to learning a lot about their issues, and we must approach any topic with the tribes with humility. One thing I learned is that we really literally moved around all the tribes, particularly away from water, against agreements that we had with them in our county area. So we need to first make sure that we're honoring our promises to the tribes in our area to make sure that they have access to what was and what should be and is their water. And the counterpart to that is continue to explore diversifying our access to water and entertaining and exploring technologies that will allow us to not rely on any one source. We're a very massive state. We're facing an increasing climate change that is increasing in pace. And so water has to be a top priority for us up at the legislature. We need to make sure that we're getting the funding that we need for the projects that we invest in. And again, I'm very proud and look forward to working with legislators who are excited to work with me to solve big problems like this. Ensure that we get the funding that we need here. And exploring the technologies. So, you know, a lot of times there's hesitation or reservation around technologies, and we just need to bring those experts to the table and find what's best for the state. Thank you.
Candidate Patel, you have a 1-minute rebuttal.
I'd like to touch in my rebuttal, I'll touch on a little bit of the extreme weather condition aspect of that question, because I don't think I touched on that earlier. When we look at our deserts and we look at where we are, San Diego is actually a desert. We are as much of a desert as Ramona is. We are as much of a desert as San Diego is, actually. It's just that we have brought in all of that water and we have planted the trees and built societies here near the coastlands. So we need to look at those extreme weather conditions and see what we can do here in our local areas. What we're seeing is fire danger at record levels. So we need to make sure as a policy space, we're not only looking at water, but we're looking at making sure our firefighters are well resourced so that when those fires come because of those extreme weather conditions, we're able to tackle them in a respectful, responsible kind of way, protecting people first, assets, and the perimeter as well. And in addition to that, when we use non-water related fire retardants, we look at what the health damages of those might be. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Well, we've reached the 1-hour limit on our forum, so we won't have the opportunity to listen to any or answer any of the questions from the audience, maybe much to your relief. I'm going to go right to closing statements. Candidate Patel, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
I appreciate everybody's time and attention here today. We had a very lively conversation around very important critical policy related issues. What I would like to leave you with is a few thoughts about me as a candidate and the candidacy and the campaign. As a candidate in this race, I am the local community candidate. I was asked to run by many community members based on my years of service in the community, understanding the issues of local community members, having volunteered and served on civic boards and in different spaces where we are able to solve problems at the local level. What we're seeing is problems that emerge from the local level are not being addressed in Sacramento, and it's time for a change. I bring that change of perspective, that change of approach, a different type of background to Sacramento. I am the most viable candidate in this race. I have won both of my past elections with huge margins. My last election in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, I won my election by a 22% margin. That whole entire seat is within this assembly district. I humbly ask for your support. Thank you.
Candidate Rocha, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
I am not aware that Poway is in this district, so I don't know where to go with that, but I am really surprised that somebody would come to you, the San Marcos Democratic Club, and tell you that people like Randy Walton are not members of your community, or not leaders in your community. Very proud to have been endorsed on day one by our former council member and mayoral candidate. This race is bigger than any one person. It's bigger than myself, and it's bigger than anyone else in this race or what they had dreamed of to do in the future. We are most certainly the strongest position to help defend the seats. Labor has backed us with 430,000 families that will knock doors for us. The legislature, based on our relationship with them, we are confident will invest millions of dollars in helping us get through this and defend the seat. Thank you.
I'd like to close this forum by thanking both candidates for their participation in our democratic process. Let's give them a round of applause. And as a reminder, the questions submitted by the audience will be provided to both candidates, who will have the opportunity to provide responses in writing, and we'll get those responses emailed to us before our October 4th meeting. Oh. Okay.
So after high school, like how are you unified? I'm located in 76. Just to clarify that, not after the school district. How are you unified extend all the way to Pomegranate?
At our San Marcos Democratic Club meeting next month on October 14th, we will hold a vote to formally endorse one of these fine candidates. I would also like to thank the San Marcos Democratic Club, and specifically Tiffany Boyd Hodson, Tanis Brown, Chris Armstrong, Paul Mendoza, Michael Allen, Carol Vandell, and Kathy Steele for organizing this forum, for Barbara Solier for our timing, and for Alan Garashi as our video producer, and every volunteer who played a role in making this event a success. Thank you. To the voters, please remember that the vote in the primary election will be on March 5th, 2024, and both candidates will be on the ballot. The winner will advance to the general election on November 5th, 2024. We have refreshments in the back, and our candidates will be staying afterwards to greet you and answer your questions. Thank you and have a good day.
No, we're not done.